And I was smart enough to know that we shall overcome did not mean probably in this lifetime. So I was dug in. I mean, I knew this is going to be a long battle.
For millions, this was the voice of a generation, a sound so pure, so powerful, it felt like it could stop armies and heal a broken world. Joan Baez, a name that means protest, peace, and power. She's the woman who stood with Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington, her voice soaring with the promise of "We shall overcome." She's the folk queen who landed on the cover of Time magazine when musicians just didn't get that kind of honor. She's the artist who took a chance on a then-unknown Bob Dylan, helping launch his songs into the stratosphere. But behind that calm exterior, behind the image of the folk Madonna with bare feet and a guitar, lies a life far more complicated and chaotic than the crowds ever saw. What happens when the roar of the crowd finally fades? What becomes of the person who was more than a singer, but a symbol? Decades after shaping history, the life of the folk legend is nothing like you'd imagine. Today, it's a story of quiet battles, unseen struggles, and a heartbreaking reality far from the spotlight. The unbelievable truth of Joan Baez's life now isn't just about sadness. It's about a profound and painful search for the very peace she fought so hard to give to others. To really get the quiet solitude of Joan Baez's life today, you have to understand the massive scale of her fame. It wasn't just a career, it was a movement. Born January 9, 1941, she was raised in a Quaker home where social justice wasn't just a talking point. It was a way of life. Her father, a respected physicist of Mexican descent, and her Scottish mother taught their daughters about nonviolence and human rights. That upbringing, mixed with the racism she faced because of her heritage, forged the conscience that would drive her music. Her rise was like a rocket. After moving to the Boston area, she started playing in Cambridge coffee houses. But the real launchpad was the 1959 Newport Folk Festival. She wasn't even on the bill, just a guest. But she left the audience spellbound. Overnight, she was the new queen of folk. Her first 3 albums all went gold, a huge deal for a folk artist back then. Her voice was called a marvel, a crystalline soprano with a fast, distinct vibrato that could hold a universe of sorrow and hope in one note. In 1962, at just 21, she was on the cover of Time magazine, cementing her status as the undisputed queen of folk music. But Baez was never just a singer. She used her fame as a tool. In 1956, she heard Martin Luther King Jr. speak on nonviolence, a moment that moved her to tears and set her life's course. They later became friends, and she was a constant presence at the biggest moments of the civil rights movement. Her performance of "We Shall Overcome" at the 1963 March on Washington forever tied her to the movement's anthem. Standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, her voice became the soundtrack for a generation demanding justice. Her activism wasn't a trend, it was who she was. She marched with King in Selma and faced down hostility and threats. She became a fierce opponent of the Vietnam War, famously withholding 60% of her income tax because she estimated that's how much went to the military. She was jailed twice for protesting the draft. In 1967, when she was banned from playing at Constitution Hall for her anti-war stance, she just held a free concert at the Washington Monument for 30,000 people. It was during this time that her life got tangled up with a scruffy, brilliant songwriter named Bob Dylan. Baez was already a global star when they met in 1961, and she was floored by his talent. She invited him on her tours, using her platform to introduce his songs to the world. From 1963 to 1965, they were folk music's royal couple, a mesmerizing blend of her ethereal voice and his raw, poetic fire. Their romance, though, was as turbulent as the times. The end was brutal and public, captured in the documentary Don't Look Back. During Dylan's 1965 tour of England, after she had tirelessly promoted him, he refused to let her on his stage. It was a humiliating rejection and a deep personal heartbreak. Dylan was moving on from the folk protest world she represented, and he broke up with her shortly after the tour. Months later, he married Sarah Lowndes. The pain of that betrayal would echo in Baez's music for years, most famously in her 1975 hit, Diamonds and Rust. Despite the pain, these were the golden days that created the icon. Joan Baez, the folk Madonna, the activist queen. She was a force of nature who seemed to channel the conscience of her time. What the world couldn't see were the cracks already forming and the silent struggles she'd been carrying since childhood. While the world saw a powerful, serene icon, Joan Baez's inner life was in chaos. On the outside, she was a pillar of strength. Inside, she was fighting a war against anxiety, depression, and the ghosts of her past. The image of the peaceful warrior was just that, an image. Her mental health struggles started long before the fame. Crippling anxiety and panic. Attacks began in childhood, sending her to therapy as a teenager. Even at her peak, these demons were her constant companions. She described an endless loop of despair. Even when she was happy, she knew a crash was coming. Being the conscience of a generation only made it worse. When the causes that defined her, like the Vietnam War, began to fade, she felt lost. For 8 years in the late 70s and early 80s, she relied on Quaaludes and other pills to numb the feelings that threatened to swallow her whole. The roots of this pain, she'd discovered decades later, were buried in her childhood. In the raw and painfully honest 2023 documentary, Joan Baez, I Am a Noise, she finally revealed the devastating truth. The film, using her personal diaries, letters and therapy tapes, pulled back the curtain on her most private fight. The most shocking revelation was that she and her younger sister Mimi came to believe through years of therapy that their father had sexually abused them. It was a long, agonizing process. For years, Baez resisted exploring that darkness, admitting it was too terrifying to face. But in her 50s, she finally confronted it. Through therapy, including hypnosis, memories began to surface. Her father denied everything, suggesting it was false memory syndrome. Baez acknowledges that the memories are hazy and can't be proven, but as she put it, if 20% of what I remember was true, it was enough to do the damage that it did. It caused a painful rift with her parents, though she eventually found a way to forgive her father before he died. This trauma, she believes, is the source of the mental health condition she has openly discussed. In interviews and her 2024 poetry collection, she has spoken about being diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, or DID. This condition, often a response to overwhelming trauma, can cause the mind to fracture into different personalities or entities. This revelation reframed her entire life. The anxiety, the depression, the panic attacks. They were symptoms of a mind that had blocked out something unbearable for 50 years. She revealed that many of her poems were written by these different personalities, which she calls the entities, including one she describes as a 12-year-old German boy whose parents survived the Holocaust. Living with this meant she was often not fully present, even with her own son, Gabriel. I wasn't there for him a lot of times, she confessed with raw honesty. I was there, but I wasn't there. The guilt of her perceived failures as a mother has been a source of deep pain. Her relationships were often difficult. She's described herself as not very good at one-on-one relationships, a pattern she links to the same unresolved trauma. The public Joan Baez was a powerful construct. She sang for peace but rarely felt it. She was a voice of clarity for millions, while her own mind was a storm. For decades, she carried this burden silently, projecting serenity while battling demons no one could see. Finally facing that darkness, Digging through the emotional wreckage of her past would become the most difficult journey of her life. It was a fight not on a public stage for the soul of a nation, but in the terrifying quiet of her own memory, for herself. As the years passed, the thunderous applause was replaced by the whisper of wind in the trees. Joan Baez didn't just vanish. She orchestrated a slow, deliberate retreat into a world of her own making, a world built for healing and peace. To call this life sad is to miss the point. It's not an ending. It's a hard-won reclamation. For over 50 years, she has lived in the same wooded home in Woodside, California, where she cared for her mother until she passed away at 100. But the most famous feature of her property isn't the house. It's the treehouse. Perched 20 feet up in an old oak tree, this was her sanctuary for years. She had it built without walls so she could be as close to nature as possible. This wasn't some quirky celebrity whim. It was the conscious choice of a woman seeking comfort in the steadfast silence of nature after a lifetime of human noise. She talks to the trees on her property, even naming one large oak the counselor, admitting it listens better than any therapist. Another crucial part of her daily life is dancing. She dances barefoot every day, a simple, private joy that's a world away from the politically charged performances of her youth. This retreat was also a practical one. Her legendary voice, a searing 3-octave soprano, inevitably softened with age. "Your voice will tell you when it's time to stop," a coach once told her, and eventually it did. She became honest about how hard she had to work to maintain it. After her Fare Thee Well tour wrapped in 2019, she officially retired from the road after 60 years. "I have not had one twinge of regret," she stated. In place of music, painting has bloomed. She has devoted herself to visual art, filling her studio with portraits of the risk-takers she admires, like Martin Luther King Jr. and a young Bob Dylan. More recently, she found another new voice in poetry. In 2024, she published her first collection, When You See My Mother, Ask Her to Dance. A deeply personal book of poems about her family, her life, and the moments that shaped her. Her life is now one of chosen solitude, but not total isolation. While she has noted a lack of romantic intimacy, she's grateful for the deep friendships she's cultivated, and she hasn't completely left the stage. In July 2024, she made a surprise appearance at the Newport Folk Festival, 65 years after it launched her career, joining Hozier and Mavis Staples, and she is scheduled to perform at a benefit concert in her honor in February 2025. So is this a sad life? It's a life marked by deep scars, mental health battles, and the grief of aging. But it's also a life of incredible courage. To frame her current existence as merely sad is to misunderstand the journey. It's a life lived authentically, a deliberate turning away from the noise to finally listen to her own soul. After fighting for a better world for everyone else, she decided the most important cause left was her own peace. The story of Joan Baez isn't a simple tragedy of a faded star. It's a complex, deeply human epic about the true cost of being an icon and the staggering resilience it takes to survive it. For 60 years, she stood at the center of history, her voice a call for justice. She didn't just sing about the movement, she was the movement. But being a generation's conscience is too heavy a burden for one person. The so-called sadness in her life today isn't about failure or irrelevance. It's the quiet that follows a lifetime of noise. Her reclusive life, her conversations with trees, her hours spent painting, these aren't signs of defeat. They are the spoils of a war fought in the shadows against demons born in childhood trauma. She has said her proudest accomplishment isn't her music, but getting through that tunnel of deep therapy. Her legacy isn't just in the gold records or the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, it's in the generations of artists she inspired, and the anthems she championed that still echo in protests today. And it's in her radical honesty. By speaking openly about her mental health, dissociative identity disorder, and history of abuse, she has performed one last profound act of protest. A protest against the silence and shame that surrounds trauma. Joan Baez may no longer stand before thousands with a guitar, but her fight isn't over. She still creates, channeling her life into paint and poetry. The unbelievable truth of her life now is not that she vanished into sadness, but that after a lifetime of fighting for the world, her final, most difficult, and most triumphant battle was for herself. She is what she's always been: a truth teller, a mischief maker, and a survivor. And in the quiet woods of California, she has finally found a measure of peace. What do you think of Joan Baez's incredible journey from global icon to private artist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the true stories behind the lives of legends, make sure you subscribe and tap the bell for notifications.